Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Roll call.
Yes.
Mayor Rankin,
Here.
Vice Mayor Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Celaya,
Here.
Hawkins.
Here.
Montano is running 10 minutes late, but he will be present. Councilmember Walter. Here. Councilmember Woolridge.
Here.
We have a quorum.
This is the first call to the public for comment on issue within jurisdiction of the town of Florence. Council rules limit public comment to 3 minutes. Individual council members may respond to criticism made by those commenting, may ask staff to review a matter raised, may ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. However, members of the council shall not discuss or take action on any matter during an open call of the public unless the matters are properly noticed for discussion and legal action. I will tell you before we go, I will take public comment on the purchase of Johnson Utilities tonight and during the public hearing or during our work session. So if anybody has anything else, stand up. If not, I'll close the call to the public. Need a motion?
Make a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Second. We have a motion and a second to adjourn to executive session. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Need a motion?
Make a motion we adjourn from executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn from executive session. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Before we go into the next agenda item, Lisa, were those extra copies of what the PowerPoint presentation is going to be? You got a green light now.
Okay. That is all materials that were given to council as a public view packet.
In the back, there are documents such as this, if anybody would like to get them, that you can follow along with a PowerPoint presentation. And also, I'd like to make an announcement that after the work session, that I will be taking public comment. You will be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll go from there. Charles.
Item 6, work session regarding acquisition of the assets of Johnson Utilities LLC and Southwest Environmental Utilities LLC. Mr. Mayor, Council, I'd first like to start off just kind of with a summary of kind of how we've come to where we're at today. Approximately August, September of last year, you know, as this town started looking about the services we're providing, and then we ended up creating the utilities department out of Public Works and trying to recognize where we were, we realized that having 2 delivery service utilities, Johnson's companies and the town of Florence's own utility, having 2 sets of different companies providing water to our residents has become problematic at times. Communication, separate billing, those type of things. So in an effort to try and see if there was any potential out there, I did communicate with Johnson Utilities to see if they would be amenable to allowing the town to acquire the assets or the utility within the municipal boundaries of the town of Florence. From those discussions, we got to the point where, as the system has been built, it would be more feasible and economically viable just to potentially purchase the entire utility from Johnson Utilities and bring it into the town system. So from that point of that discussion, that's kind of how we got here today. There's a number of benefits for it. You'll hear that from, you know, Dan Jackson, who's from economist.com, and a number of other people. There's a number of excellent benefits why the town would or should do this. So what I'd like to do tonight is we're going to have a PowerPoint presentation from Dan Jackson, as I've said, from economist.com. He is the town's independent contractor that the town hired. We also hired John Mata from WWTP Engineers, from Waterworks Engineers, to do the infrastructure assessment and evaluation of the water and wastewater utilities for Johnson's companies. And we also hired independent accountant to look at books. So we've had a number of independent consultants working on behalf of the town to do the evaluation to make sure the mayor and the council have the information that you all need to make an informed decision, and that when we release the information, that the general public also knows that the council has taken very good care at doing an independent evaluation. So to start off, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Jackson. After him, it'll be, I believe, Dan Hodges with Johnson Utilities to make a PowerPoint presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Minato to go through some of the agreements that are set before you all. So, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Dan Jackson. I am the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Economist.com. We have had the privilege of being the town's water and wastewater rate consultant for the last decade. We have helped you with your financial planning since approximately the year 2004. We've done a lot of work in the state of Arizona, not only with water and wastewater rate analyses, but also with the acquisitions of utilities, because many utilities in the state of Arizona have been acquired by municipalities over the last 10 to 15 years. It is something that's happening mainly due to the significant amount of growth that's happened in the city. But when a utility is acquired, there is a specific set of financial analyses that typically needs to be done in order for the municipality to determine whether or not the acquisition is a good deal. This acquisition that we were asked to analyze for the town of Florence is a very significant one. I think that it could best be described as a game changer with regards to the management of water and sewer resources here in the town of Florence. It's going to fundamentally change your town. It's going to fundamentally change your water and wastewater utility. Now, when towns like Florence are considering whether or not to make an acquisition like this, they usually seek to answer a couple of very key questions with regards to the potential acquisition. The first question that's asked is the price being asked a reasonable price? Or is it too high, or is it too low? Secondly, can the town afford it? I mean, obviously, an acquisition is not a good acquisition if it's not affordable by the town. The third question is, once you acquire the utility, will the revenues that you will get from the accounts that you acquired be enough to pay all the expenses of operating the system? If the expenses are greater than the revenues, then that leads you to believe that the acquisition may not be in the best interest of the town. On the contrary, if revenues do exceed expenses, then that does indicate that it is a good acquisition. The fourth is, what general benefits does the town accrue by making such an acquisition? I mean, in other words, what's in it for the town? Why do it? How does it make you a better community? And finally, what are the risks involved in an acquisition like this? Well, in the hopefully brief presentation I go through tonight, I'd like to try to address each of those questions with regards to the acquisition of Johnson Utilities. So without further ado, let me go through just the very basic terms of the deal as it's been outlined to us. The purchase price being asked for by Johnson Utilities is approximately $121 million. It's going to be funded by bonds that are purchased from the seller. It's basically a seller finance transaction. The closing date is intended to be sometime in mid to late 2014. These things take time. There's a process that you go through when you actually make an acquisition and close a deal like this. There are steps that have to be done, but well, obviously we would want to try to close this deal as quickly as possible. And then finally, part of the deal would be that there would be a 5-year management agreement after an acquisition. After the acquisition. This is a fairly common criteria because what happens is when a town makes an acquisition of a utility, you like to have the management of the previous utility there to provide guidance and assistance to you as you make the transition. You don't want them to just hand the keys to you and walk away, and then on the first day you say, how in the world am I going to run this thing? You want their expertise to be part of the system so that you can gradually transition yourselves in to take over the entire utility. Okay, let's take a quick look at some of the numbers. As I said, the offering price was about $121 million. What are you basically acquiring? Well, you're acquiring approximately 56,000 accounts. Now, this number varies a little bit based on what any given month the number of active connections are. In any given month, there are people that connect to the system, there are people that disconnect from the system, so the number is going to vary a little bit, but we're talking about basically about 56,000 accounts. What that means is that the town of Florence would be paying about $2,162 for every account you acquire. That's an important number because the basic metric that is used in determining the reasonableness of a transaction and an acquisition of this nature is the price per active account. So, we're looking at $2,162 per active account under the terms of the deal as it's been outlined. Is this a reasonable price? Well, I would argue that this price is actually very reasonable, and this is why. When you compare the price being asked for Johnson Utilities with the price that has been paid for other utilities of a similar nature here in the state of Arizona over the last 10 to 15 years, you see that the acquisition price compares very favorably. For example, there have been two major acquisitions here in this part of Arizona in the last 5 years, both of which were done by the town of Queen Creek, one of your neighbors. Queen Creek bought Queen Creek Water Company about 6 or 7 years ago, and then they just purchased H2O Water Company about a year or so ago. When Queen Creek bought Queen Creek Water Company, they paid $4,000 per active connection. My firm worked extensively with the town of Queen Creek on that acquisition, and we thought that was a very good deal at $4,000 a connection. The H2O Water Company acquisition was $4,500 a connection. The Johnson Utilities transaction is $2,100 a connection. So obviously, the Johnson Utilities acquisition compares very favorably to these two utilities. Now, let's take a look at some of the other utility transactions that have taken place here in the state of Arizona over the last 15 years. This is a comparison of water company purchases from the years 2004 to 2013. As you can see, I got about 15 of them here. The average purchase price was about $3,200 per active connection. Now, the purchase price varied pretty significantly. It went from $1,000 for the Pine Strawberry Water Company to as much as $7,800 a connection for the Cave Creek Water Company. And that's not uncommon. You're going to see a lot of variation in the price paid for these utilities. It's sort of like saying, well, I have a 2005 Toyota Camry and my neighbor has a 2005 Toyota Camry. Well, that doesn't mean that the two cars are worth the same amount of money. I mean, my car could have 250,000 miles on it and all the upholstery could be torn up, where his car could have 20,000 miles on it and be in brand new condition. So obviously, just because one water company sells for a certain price that's more or less than another company, that's not a definitive statement. But when you look at this chart, you see that the price being asked for Johnson Utilities is actually below the average. It's not only almost 50% below the average, it's also below most of the other water companies that have been purchased in Arizona in the last 15 years. For that reason, I would recommend to the council that the offering price being proposed is a reasonable one given what you would be acquiring. Okay, the next thing that needs to be looked at is what would be the impact on the town of Florence of acquiring this utility? Well, the way you analyze this is that you do a comprehensive forecast of what you think is going to happen once you acquire the utility. You look at the accounts that you acquire, and you forecast how many additional revenues you're going to get, not only now, but in the future. You look at the expenses that you think you're going to accrue in the utility, and you calculate what you think those expense increases are going to be over the next 10 to 20 years, because one thing's certain, expenses go up, and you have to take that into consideration. So what we did for the town was we did a comprehensive 25-year financial model where we projected all of the revenues from the acquired utility and all the expenses from the acquired utility. The forecast was based on a series of assumptions which we think are actually very conservative in nature. We wanted to be as conservative as possible in our assumptions. For example, we assume that there will only be very modest annual account growth. There is going to be account growth in this utility over the next 10 to 20 years. Key question is, how many new accounts are you going to get? Well, there's a lot of differing opinions about how much growth there's going to be, both in this area and around the state of Arizona over the next 20 years. For the purposes of this analysis, we're actually assuming that growth is going to be very modest. We're also assuming that a lot of the expenses are going to continue to go up by 3 to 5% a year because costs go up. They go up every year, and they're going to continue to go up every year, and a prudent utility takes that into consideration when doing any kind of a financial forecast. And finally, we assume the following, that there will be rate increases over the next 10 to 20 years. The average utility in the state of Arizona is raising its water rates 5 to 6% every year. Water costs throughout Arizona are going up. They're going up every year. They're going up rapidly. And so I think it is reasonable to assume that water costs and rates are going to go up not only here in the town of Florence, but they're also going to go up in the acquired utility. And I think that that is a fact of life. I think anybody who thinks that you can acquire a utility of this nature and not have rate increases in the future, I think that's wishful thinking. So, one of the things that has to be accepted is that if this utility is acquired, there are going to be the need for rate increases in the future. Every other utility in the state of Arizona is doing it, so there's no reason to believe that Johnson Utilities' acquired utility isn't going to need it as well. But the reason why we do this analysis is very simple. The key is to determine whether the town could operate the utility at a reasonable cost to ratepayers while still deriving a financial benefit. In other words, how big will the rate increases be? What will the burden be to the ratepayers? Will it be enough to pay operating expenses? And will the city have a benefit by acquiring this utility? That's what we're trying to project. Now, before I go through the numbers, I want to give you a couple of very important notes about this forecast. The first thing to keep in mind is that this is a forecast. A forecast is not a guarantee. A forecast is a prediction based on a set of reasonable assumptions that may or may turn out to be correct. Nobody can tell the future with perfect accuracy. If I could tell the future with perfect accuracy, I wouldn't be standing here tonight. I'd probably be living in a yacht outside of Santa Monica. And when I was in business school, I had a business professor who said, you know what, if I could tell the future perfectly and I knew what was going to happen, I sure wouldn't tell you about it. I'd just keep it to myself. The bottom line is that you cannot tell the future with perfect accuracy. Because you can't, there always remains the possibility that any forecast is going to turn out to have expenses that are greater than expected or revenues that are less than expected. In other words, I don't want somebody coming back to me 5 years from now and saying, well, you know, your revenues didn't quite, the forecast you gave in 2014 assumed X amount of revenues and you didn't quite make that, so you must not have known what you were doing. Well, you make a projection based on what you think is going to happen now and in the future, and that's what this forecast is based on. And making a business deal of this magnitude is a risk. There's always going to be a risk in doing any kind of an acquisition, any kind of a business deal, particularly one of this magnitude. Risks are a part of life. Risk can't be analyzed away. And that is something for you to keep in mind as I show you some of these numbers. Okay. The biggest assumption we make is how much growth do you anticipate there being in the service area? Well, this chart right here is a summary of the forecast current and future water accounts. As you can see, the Johnson Utilities operation had a fairly remarkable record of growth over the last 15 years. In the year 2001, Johnson Utilities had 910 water accounts, but by 2005 that had reached 14,000. That's pretty remarkable. I don't think, in my 30 years of working with water utilities, I don't think I've ever seen a growth rate of that size. I think that's pretty remarkable. The growth rate tailed off in the latter part of the first decade of the 21st century as the recession hit, as the economy went south. But what's important to note is that even though growth in many parts of the state of Arizona basically stopped, you still saw growth in this area over the last 5 years. You had about a little less than 20,000 accounts in 2009, and to the current year, you now have 24,000 accounts. So even in the worst of times, you are still experiencing growth. That leads one to believe that growth will continue to be a pretty important part of this utility operation. What are we assuming? For the purposes of this forecast, we're assuming that the utility is going to continue to grow at a rate of about 1,000 water accounts and 1,300 wastewater accounts a year. What that means is that the 24,000 water accounts that you have today will reach approximately 43,000 accounts by the year 2033. That has a lot of ramifications. Every new account means a new ratepayer. It means a new minimum charge. It means a new volume rate. It has a benefit to the town, but there are also additional costs with growth as well. So you have to factor all of that when you look at an acquisition of this nature. Okay, I could spend a lot of time going through numbers because that's what people like me do, but I thought I would just cut to the chase here. This chart right here summarizes the comprehensive financial analysis we did for the town. What this chart shows us is as follows. This is a chart comparing forecast revenues and forecast expenses for the first 20 years of operation by the town of the acquired Johnson Utilities water and sewer operation. As you can see, the blue line is forecast revenues and the red line is the forecast cost of providing service. And that cost includes the debt service payments on the debt that you take out to purchase the system, as well as all operating costs, personnel, chemicals, electricity, insurance, all of that. What this chart shows you is very simple. In every year of the forecast, the revenues are anticipated to exceed expenses. So what you have is an operation that right now not only is financially healthy in the current year, but is expected to become even more so under operation by the town. Every year, revenues are forecast to exceed expenses under the financial forecast that we presented for the town. Okay, what does that mean? What are some of the benefits that the town could potentially accumulate by purchasing this utility? Well, I've summarized 5 bullet points as the primary benefits to the town of this acquisition. The first benefit is basically you would increase the efficiency of not only your town staff, but the workforce in operating the two systems. You see, you already have a water and sewer operation in place right now. What you're doing is acquiring another one. You don't need to build an entire new infrastructure to run that acquired operation. You've already got one in place. You're going to need more people, you're going to accrue more expenses. But you see, there is a very basic principle in water utility economics. It doesn't cost you twice as much to manage 20,000 accounts as it does to manage 10,000 accounts. It's a principle called economies of scale. And since you already have a working water and wastewater operation in place, you will accrue additional expenses by running the acquired operation, but it will increase the efficiency level of your operation as well. So that's a benefit to the town. It's a benefit to the users in the acquired area, and it's a benefit to the users in the existing Florence area as well. The second benefit is that it is typical for a water and wastewater utility that is owned by a municipality to contribute a portion of their revenues to the general fund. It's what's known as a general fund contribution. The idea behind it is that the general fund or other city services provide support to the water and wastewater operation. So for that reason, the water and wastewater operation compensates the general fund for the cost accrued. So what our financial model assumed was that 10% of the revenues of the acquired Johnson Utilities operation would go to the town's general fund. Well, guess what? The more revenues you have in the general fund, the less taxes you have to collect. So that's a benefit, additional funds to the general fund. A third benefit is that the current franchise fee that is assessed on Johnson Utilities customers in the town of Florence would be eliminated under this proposal. Because it's now a town operation, there would no longer be a franchise fee, so that's a 5% benefit to the existing customers right now. A fourth is that, remember on the previous chart, I showed you that the revenues are forecast to exceed expenses. What that means is that you would have net positive cash flow every year. Well, there's a lot of decisions that you can make with regards to what to do with that cash flow. But what it could do is you could use that cash flow to invest in your system to not only improve the quality of it, but also to limit the expenses accrued by the existing town operation. So the additional revenues accumulated by the acquired Johnson Utilities operation would not only benefit the ratepayers in the Johnson service area, but it would benefit the ratepayers in the existing town service area also. And the final benefit is that the net cash flow could be used to limit future rate increases. You know what? When you have revenues that exceed expenses, that's a good thing for a municipality. And one thing to keep in mind about running a municipal operation, you are a non-profit organization. You're not in this to make a, quote, profit. Look, I'm not against profits. Believe me, I'm a private businessman too. I like profits as much as the next person. But a municipality treats net revenues differently than a private corporation does. Those net revenues can be invested in your system that will improve the quality of service and limit the financial burden for your existing ratepayers. So when the question is asked, what's in it for the town? Why should we do this? Why should we take on this new utility? There's a lot of reasons you would want to take on this new utility. Okay, are there risks? Of course there are risks. Nothing is certain in life except death and taxes. So what that means is that any acquisition is going to carry a certain amount of risk with it. Now, what are the risks involved in this acquisition? Well, there are several risks that would possibly be incurred. One risk is that growth just doesn't happen. You know, there's no reason to believe that you're not going to continue to see growth, but at the same time, you know, what happens if you don't get as much growth as you anticipated? That's a risk. Second thing is, we in town staff have modeled out what we believe the personnel requirements are going to be of the acquired system. We think we've got a pretty good handle on what the personnel is going to be, but there's always a possibility you might need some additional personnel. You're not really going to know that until you have the system and you're running it. A third risk is operating expenses. Remember that magic word, forecast. We forecast those operating expenses, but there's always the possibility that some expenses might be more than others. There's also the possibility that your capital improvement needs might be greater than forecast. And finally, there's always that X factor out there. You know, you're making an investment that will significantly impact the future of the town of Florence. Well, when you're talking about doing something that's going to help you, your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, you're talking about something that's going to happen over the next 20 to 50 to 100 years. Well, who knows what's going to happen over that period of time? There could be some kind of major economic disruption. There could be a recession, terrorist attack, a weather event. Who knows what could happen? All of that could have an impact on your revenues and expenses. So like I said, nothing is certain in life. There are risks involved. There's no way to avoid risk. That's sort of a part of life. But to summarize my presentation, I just want to summarize with some very important points. The first and foremost, our analysis indicates that the acquisition price is a reasonable one. It's very affordable, certainly when you compare it to other utilities. It's affordable in the sense that the revenues that you are forecast to accrue are enough to pay all of your expenses as well as the acquisition cost itself. The economic and financial forecast indicates that there are numerous potential benefits to the town. There are risks also, but there are potential benefits. In my opinion, I think that this is a very reasonable deal for the town. I think it's something that should be looked at very carefully. I think it is something that has the potential of really impacting your town for the greater. And I think that it is an acquisition that you should very, very seriously consider. That really concludes my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Any member of the council have a question for Dan? I just got a couple connected with you and Mark. Mark, Dan is predicting the growth to go. Does that compute out with what you've looked at Florence and the surrounding area in the planning department?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, I think the growth projections are very reasonable.
Explain some of the cost factors that are uncontrollable by the council on your forecasted revenues and expenses.
Sure.
The cost of well, one of them.
Absolutely. But one of the things you need to understand about a water and wastewater utility in general, and that is that a lot of the costs that you incur in operating a water and wastewater operation are really beyond your control. For example, look at something as simple as inflation. You know, the cost of everything goes up by 3% a year. You have no control over that, so that cost is going to go up. Other costs are going up at rates even greater than inflation, things like insurance, workers' compensation, chemicals, electricity. All of those costs are going up at rates that are even higher than inflation. A third factor is the fact that it costs a lot of money to build a water operation. You know, it costs a lot of money to build all those lines and build those wastewater treatment plants and those lift stations and all those other assets. Well, like any asset, they're going to wear out over time. What that means is that they're going to have to be replaced. You know, and so you don't have any control over that. I mean, there's only so long a water line or a pump station or a treatment plant is going to be useful before you have to invest more money in keeping it operational. So a lot of the cost increases are going to be for reasons that are just simply beyond your control. Water is an expensive commodity. It's going to be more expensive in the 21st century for a lot of reasons that you don't have any control over. But if you develop a good financial plan and you understand what these costs are and you understand when you're going to incur them, you can develop a financial plan that enables you to recover all your costs at rates that minimize the impact on your existing ratepayers.
Wayne, John, you guys are the head of our engineering department and our wastewater, and concerning the 5-year management agreement, do you believe that's a good management agreement, a time span for us to be able to take it over completely?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think that 5 years is reasonable. It's going to take some time, as Mr. Jackson has pointed out before, that 2 people can live in one house easier than 2 people can live separately. It is going to be a process. As we get acclimated to the existing system, merge that with ours, I think that term is reasonable.
And I want you to go explain that to my wife.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
I got something.
Tom?
Okay. One figure I haven't heard, so let's start at the base of it. This is a 5 years at what percent?
I'm sorry?
Answer it. Well, when we're talking about interest on these bonds,
Right.
the first 5 years are at a different rate than the second. What is the rate for the first 5 years?
Let me handle that if I can. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Smith, the term of the bonds is going to be 30 years. Okay, the first 5 years of the bonds are interest only on the bonds, solely for the purpose of being able to fund debt reserve accounts, capital accounts, to make sure that the bonds are fully funded, and if there's any emergency money needed for capital costs, those accounts are funded, so it's interest only. The first 5 years, I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be about 5% or so. The next 25 years will be at 8%, which is the same interest rate of the bonds from Queen Creek and H2O purchase, which was 8%.
Okay. Now that's, we can understand, maybe looking at my finance chairman over there to crunch some numbers, not tonight, but I'll need them. If we take the 5% at 5 years, 8% at 30 years, realizing these are municipal bonds and they're tax-free bonds to the holder, I need to know what the town's paying over the period of the 30 years for the entire project. That figure has not been brought up. So if our finance chairman would crunch those numbers for me, and I'll see you in a day or two, and I'd appreciate that.
Sure, those numbers could be crunched.
Hey, Tom,
I don't have it with me, but I could do it very easily.
Do you have anything else? Go ahead.
just to help you out, it's 6.625% interest only for the first 5 years, 8% per annum for years 6 through 30, and they'll mature in 2044.
The what?
They'll mature in 2024, but the first year, the interest rate is 6.625%.
What is the total that we are paying out at the end of the bonds?
Councilman Smith, can you, I think Mr. Jackson can give you a pretty close approximate number.
I just don't have that number off the top of my head, but I could calculate it pretty easily.
That's what I need to know, because that's
Okay.
what's going to cost the people of Florence over these years.
I don't think it's costing the people of Florence over the years. The entire project is self-funding. It's paying for itself.
I agree with you on that, if it's self-funding. However, we don't know what the economy is going to do to this whole country, let alone this town,
I think that's why we have this presentation right now.
and it's all approximate. Just want to know that fact.
Well, we can get that back to you. Staff can compute that up and get it to you. Again, it's not the citizens of Florence, it's all the users that will be paying this. And if I understand it's right, it's called a revenue bond, and the revenue from the utilities, from the customers will be paying the bond. Won't be coming out to general fund, won't be coming out of no taxes increased to the town inside the corporate limits.
That's if everything goes right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, even if it doesn't go right, then we make the adjustment at the utility users in the area that are using, we make that adjustment with them. We don't make it with the residents of the town of Florence. They become their own district, basically.
Well, that's the same thing as what Tom is talking about is the same thing that would happen if something happened here in town today with the water company we have it today. If something was to go bad, then it's going to fall back on the customers again here within the corporate limits.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, a couple things I want to add is initially when we started looking at this, the proposal that came forth to us did not include the potential of additional connections that we're selling, that the purchase was for the town. So we made an assumption, even if there are minimal to no growth and additional connections, the annual rate that we would have to increase, if it's 3%, the utility will still function perfectly fine. That is one of those things we did look at initially, even if there was no growth.
Still want the figure.
Ruben?
Sorry?
I still want that figure.
Oh, no, we will absolutely get you the paper, Vice Mayor. In addition to that, I would like to say that initially when the town looked at this acquisition, I think in 2007, 2006, the purchase price was in excess of $190 million. This is considerably different. We made sure we did our due diligence and took our time. So I think this is a much favorable deal as compared to the one that was prior. So.
Well, it very well could be, but I just need that figure to look it over the long run.
Ruben?
Yes, Charles, what is the comparison right now on the rates between water as well as Johnson Utilities?
Dan?
They're very close right now. I believe the Johnson Utilities average for a user of 8,000 to 10,000 gallons a month is a few dollars higher, but they're a lot closer now than they used to be.
And our goal, if we acquire this, is to maintain that or keep it, or make it to that they're the same?
I think the goal over the next few years, if the utility is acquired, is to make it parity with our current system, is that all town residents have the similar rate. Now, we'll have to watch how we do that, because then they're in two different AMAs. But there are also, as Mr. Jackson said, there's also other savings that we can help balance that. We don't need two IT departments. We don't need two managers over two different utilities. So there's going to be savings in the acquisition that will take away from the cost that will help bring those rates down.
And the savings that we make will eventually be passed on to the consumer somewhere down the line.
Yes, and that's absolutely our goal.
Okay, any other questions from Dan? Dan, thank you very much. If you'd stick around, please, we'll have some comments from the audience here in a little bit, and you may want to answer some of them that I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Dan Hodges from Johnson Utilities. Oh, and Mr. George Johnson.
That's not mighty nice of you to do that.
Absolutely.
I've been mayor and members of the council. My name is George Johnson. I've been given a prepared speech, but let me just speak from the heart for a minute, and then I'll turn it over for all the facts with Mr. Hodges. We applaud the town's vision and willingness to allow the voters to be part of this historic decision, and we look forward to sharing the many positive benefits this acquisition will bring to the residents of Florence. The important choice will position the town of Florence to take the driver's seat and give the residents and council the keys to determine future plans for responsible growth as residents see fit. Residents will see no increase in utility bills for a while, and at that point, I think the town is, I was told, will do a rate study, and they will go from there. The residents will see no increase, and they will have an even greater direct voice in how their service is delivered in the future. By agreeing to acquire the utility, the town will create a reliable revenue source that will benefit future priority projects and initiatives of importance to the citizens. I'm going to cut my part a little short. I just want to make a couple of bullet points. Johnson Utilities is financing 100% of the sales price. The town puts up not $1. The bonds are secured only by the revenues of the assets. The town has no liability for the payment of the purchase price. Johnson Utilities bears the entire risk of the payment of the bonds. The Phoenix IDA is an independent third-party issuer of the bonds. From an optic standpoint, this dispels any confusion that the town is issuing its own bonds. The one-time closing fee and annual fees payable to the Phoenix IDA have been drastically reduced, Mr. Smith, by the Phoenix IDA as an accommodation to Johnson Utilities. The price was, I think, somewhere around $120,000. It's down to $48,000 because there's a good track record, there's a good record of revenues, and they look forward to the town of Florence as being a damn good provider. And you have good directors of your departments, and we look forward to working with them and seeing this whole thing come to fruition. The use of an IDA to issue bonds was part of Johnson Utilities' initial proposal as presented to the town of Florence back in September. This is one of the deal points that led to the purchase price that was very advantageous to the town. I don't know how to put this. Let me say that I had a dream and a vision. And with that, we started Johnson Ranch, we started water and sewer. It's now grown. We've done a good job, but I have no one to carry on. I'm 82 years old. And I look around, I've had a good relationship with Florence. I know the directors of their different departments. And to me, Florence is the one to take this project forward. It's only 25% complete. You have another 75% that wasn't even included in the purchase price. And we look forward to Florence, if you all see fit, to taking this company forward and making it the pride of your community and your residents. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Danny?
Mayor and Council, thank you very much. Thank George. I don't know how I'm going to follow that. I think I should just sit down. But basically here today just to educate the town on the deal and Johnson Utilities itself. A couple things that Mr. Johnson already brought up, that this is seller-financed bonds. We're taking all the bonds back. The town of Florence residents are not taking on any risk in this deal. The revenue bonds are secured only by Johnson Utilities revenue. Revenues at current rates will pay the financing on the purchase, which is very important to Johnson Utilities, being that we are taking on that risk of carrying the financing on the deal. The town of Florence has no liability for the payment of the purchase price. The town of Florence will receive in excess of $3.5 million in cash assets at closing to help fund a reserve accounts for future capital needs that the town may have. The purchase does not impact the town's bonding capacity, and I believe as already mentioned by Mr. Jackson, the 5% franchise fee currently paid by JU customers who reside within the town boundaries will no longer be charged, so those customers will see an automatic decrease. This was just a statement Mr. Johnson already addressed to the council. Wanted to real brief give the mayor and council and the public, is there, give me 1 second, I've got a, thank you, you got a pointer? I think so, right there. Will it pop up on the top? Ah, perfect. The map before you is, the purple is an outline of Johnson Utilities service territory. We currently serve up to Maricopa County, which is the border between Queen Creek and Pinal County, all the way out to Superstition and into Superstition Vistas in our service territory. Dropping down here, you'll see on the southernmost area is Anthem, down into Montero, which currently does not have homes as of yet. The checkered line here is the town of Florence boundaries, showing that the overlap between the town and Johnson Utilities service territory. We also have a couple in red, a couple expansions that are in process right now. As Mr. Johnson pointed out, we're only 25% built out to this day based on the existing service territory. That does not include the state land that's the infield. So there's quite a bit more growth than even that 75% as mentioned by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jackson, I thought, did a great job in his presentation. Both him and Waterworks engineers did a great job, and we worked with them for several months, and we thank them for all their hard work. In his presentation, he did bring up the H2O purchase. They were purchased for $44 million. They had approximately 9,441 connections at $4,600 a connection. Our price currently, our connection price, our connections between us and Mr. Jackson were slightly different. Johnson Utilities just used the end of the year numbers in 2013 and did not have an estimate for what the customer count would be at closing. But even at that rate, you can see that the price per connection is less than half of what Queen Creek just purchased H2O for. From your independent evaluation from Waterworks engineers, they went forward and analyzed our system, and they provided two basically evaluations for council. One of them is important to note. They start off and do an analysis of the system of what it would cost the town if the town said, hey, we want to start Johnson Utilities from scratch. Well, let's do it today. How much is it going to cost, the council, the town, to go ahead and do it? Based on their analysis, that cost would be $525 million if they were going to put in a brand new system today. Obviously, our system is not brand new. We do have a depreciation that's happened. And so what they've done in the following column next to that is basically a replacement cost new. It takes into consideration the depreciation in the assets. Even with the depreciation in the assets, you can see that the valuation on the company is approximately $378 million provided for from the town's consultants. Mr. Jackson did a great job on projecting growth on going forward. We feel he was very conservative on it. We put together our own projections as well, just based on historical, so that council could see basically what the growth was in one of the worst downturns we've seen. And this is what we've done as a utility. Back in January of '07, water and sewer connections, on the first column, we had approximately 36,969 connections. Ending out December of 2013, we ended up with 53,855 connections, so a total growth of 16,886 connections over those 7 years. That average came out to about $2,400 a connection, right in line with approximately with Mr. Jackson's projection. I believe he had a little bit more on the water and a little bit less on the sewer, but I think his estimates came out to about approximately 2,300 connections on his report. Below the first table, we have just an estimated number of connections within our service territory, where we've taken basically the count on all the master utility agreements we have, an area that's in our CCN, and at build out today, just what's in our service territory, the town is going to be assuming a responsibility of about 211,395 connections. That's where basically the 25% of our 25% build out capacity comes from. As previously stated, we're only 25% built out. The town of Florence is paying for current level of connections only, and not for any future growth or the size of our service territory. Our financial projections that we had prepared and given to staff basically took a conservative estimate so that we could stand before you today and say the rates, because of this transaction, are not going to go up. We did our comparison on a growth factor of less than what we've seen in this worst downturn, at 500 connections a year and 1,000 wastewater connections per year. Just as far as to remark to Mr. Jackson's comments on potential growth and what's out there, we thought it was a good idea to bring to council and the town kind of a level of capacity of what we have built and capable for service today. What you're looking at here is basically our 4 wastewater treatment plants that we have in operation today. One's called Pecan, Santan, Section 11, and Anthem. In the first column over, we have a column called built capacity, and your built capacity is based on an average MGD, which stands for million gallons a day, of how much basically wastewater we can treat. We are currently built to a level of 7.1 million gallons a day. Of that, the next column we included so that the town could also see, we have permitted with DEQ, meaning we've gone forward and paid for the engineering already for future capacities for wastewater, up to double what we have today at 15.4 million gallons a day, where that engineering is done and provided for, and the town will be getting the advantage of. Currently today, we are treating approximately 4.77 million gallons a day, leaving us an extra capacity of 2.3 million gallons a day, which is, even at design capacity at 187 gallons per day, we are able to treat another 12,460 homes, which by Mr. Jackson's report will put us approximately 10 years out before needing to build additional plant items. That comment on the 187 gallons per day, that's again another conservative number. It's a design number. Our actual flows are actually running 150 gallons a day, and that's what triggers when you need to build another wastewater treatment facility. And by that measure, you probably have about 15,000 homes in actuality before needing the additional treatment. Within the 5-year management proposal with Johnson Utilities to manage for the town. Although we're built out on growth, you don't want to wait till the last minute, but plus with Johnson Utilities comes a level of experience where Mr. Johnson's put into place where we build our wastewater treatment facilities, our water plants, our wells. We've set up a system like Southwest Airlines models where we duplicate the same plant over and over again, so we don't have to pay for brand new engineering every time we do something. We've got basically a standardized system where we have been in the business over 40 years and have learned how to basically put together a wastewater treatment facility for a very reasonable price. We've provided cost estimates to town staff for use going forward, and the plan is within that first 5 years to go ahead and build another phase which on the Pecan wastewater treatment plant, just so we can give that experience to the town of Florence as part of the deal. Just as a note, in the engineering estimates, they estimate that it costs, as far as industry standards, around $10 a gallon. Plus, on top of the estimates that council was given, they've calculated in a 40% contingency, just in case something costs overrun. We feel that they were very conservative in their numbers for the town, and we appreciate that. But on the other side of things, we definitely would like to show the town how we can and do things efficiently for the town and its residents and our customers going forward. One other point that I didn't mention on the top of the slide is, as part of the projections and the money's coming to the town and collections coming in, we have budgeted for the $5 million in our financials to cover that building of the wastewater treatment facility within those 5 years. And all the money will be in the reserve account prior to the start of any construction. Some of this I've already made mention of, that the engineering reports based on industry standard costs, and on top of those industry standard costs, there's been a 40% contingency added. So we feel that they've been very conservative in the numbers that they've given the town. So us in operating and have been operating over, like I said, the 40 years in experience, we're very happy with the fact that we know that those costs are not going to be higher than what's been stated in your projections by your consulting team. And next. One other thing I wanted to mention on the engineering report, for when council's reviewing the report, is the report assumes replacement of entire water and sewer facilities at the end of their stated useful lives. In our experience in the water and sewer business over the last 20 years, we're continually having to maintain facilities, fix things, build them, replace pumps. Typically, what you find is that these facilities, they don't go to an end of a book life of 30 years, and all of a sudden you just throw the whole thing away and you start over from scratch. Those are constantly maintained over those years. So that's another area where we felt that the engineering report was very conservative. Also, another part in the engineering report, they showed a cost for lift stations, which is a very real cost. Mr. Jackson mentioned lift stations for the council and members of the public that may not know what a lift station is. A lift station basically is a pump station. It's a vault where all the sewer runs into, and then it's pumped over to the wastewater treatment plant. In the projections, the lift stations were shown as a utility cost or a cost of the town. Typically, when a developer comes on board, the requirement by a utility in the town is for the developer to pay for the cost to connect their systems up to the town's existing system or the utility company. And we do not anticipate that to change once the town has control of the system. It'd still be a developer cost to pay for those lift stations. As far as the remaining water capacity we have, total production, well production we have on gallons per day right now, we have developed is 22 million gallons that we have. Currently, our average usage per resident is about 332 gallons a day. So that being said, you can see the numbers here. We have approximately sorry, I lost my spot on the spot on the page. We have enough at the 22 million gallons to serve 67,000 homes. Total number of water connections we served at the end of 2013 was 22,954. So total connections available on the water that we have for growth is 44,000 connections. So basically what we're trying to get at with the town is, yes, you're getting a good deal on the system, but there's nothing hiding there. That we have provided and have the facilities in place to take care of the future growth going forward for many years into the future. So, question came up on rates. I'm glad that question was asked. We put together a little rate comparison. We used 7,500 gallons of usage per month. That's what WIFA uses when in comparison other utilities within the state. Town of Florence rates currently at 7,500 gallons at a 3/4 inch meter, which is the typical meter size. Average resident would be $71.77. At Johnson Utilities' current rates, we would be at $31.51 for water, $42 for sewer, and so basically $73.51. And currently, the town of Florence is slightly below where Johnson Utility is. We use the 7,500 gallons here just for a note point. Our usage average is basically about 6,900 a month. It's actually slightly less than this. But we thought that this was a good area. If you were to go higher on a rate comparison, our rates are set up for conservation purposes with Arizona Corporation Commission. The state rewards individuals with lower water usage, obviously because we live in a desert. So, initially, the economist.com just had their comparisons for the town on their initial reports, just showing 10,000 gallons of water usage and 5,000 for sewer. If you looked at Johnson Utilities rates compared to that, our rates would show higher, and that's because of that conservation I had mentioned before. And then just as a note, the average Anthem resident, which resides within the town, uses about 6,300 gallons, but system-wide we're at 6,900. Real quick, and we're probably tired with rates, but we just wanted to put in a slide on basically where Johnson Utilities and Florence sits kind of with other users out there and the Arizona Corporation Commission. As far as the water is concerned, the Arizona Corporation Commission average rate is $38.09. Johnson Utilities is sitting at $31.51, well below average. On the sewer system, Johnson Utilities is $42. The average Arizona Corporation Commission rate is $44. Again, we're below the average as far as the ACC regulated rates. Real quick, we wanted to just make a couple notes. We had worked very closely with Henry and Horn, who went through our financials in 2013, and after their analysis of the financials, they determined that our actual numbers for 2013 exceeded the projections that were given to the town as far as our budgeting was concerned. So we're actually beating expectations. Our projections are based on historical and anticipated future performance at a very conservative growth number. We would have to agree with Mr. Jackson's presentation that this is a very excellent opportunity for the town of Florence at the rates and the projections that have been given. Just want to touch on one thing again, that we are providing this and that as a seller-financed bonds. So we basically are buying all the bonds for the town, so we don't have to worry about going out and marketing and trying to find someone who can pick up these bonds. We are taking all these bonds back. The town of Florence has no liability for the payment of the purchase price. The town of Florence residents are not exposed to any risk on this deal. JU is taking on the entire risk of any non-payment of the bonds, and the town of Florence does not have to increase rates to pay for this purchase price. Mr. Johnson mentioned it already, but as part of it, we've been able to bring in the Phoenix IDA, and we have a representative here this evening that can answer any questions for the town council as well. But they're a third-party independent issuer of the bonds. The fees have been reduced by over 50% to accommodate the town and Johnson Utilities because of the strength of the revenues in this deal. These fees are paid completely from project revenues and not by the town. Project revenues are more than adequate to cover the fees. The use of the IDA to issue the bonds has been a requirement for us, the seller, since initial discussions regarding the sale. The strength of the revenues being produced is the reason the town of Florence is receiving such an advantageous fee structure from the IDA. And again, this structure was the same structure that was shown in Mr. Jackson's report. Real quick, we wanted to just touch basis on the management agreement. Johnson Utilities is looking forward to the management agreement, and it allows for a smooth transition to the town of Florence in managing the system. Obviously, with 55,000 connections, if the town were trying to step into our shoes on day one, that would be a heavy undertaking. And with us carrying the financing on the bonds, we have a vested interest in making sure that the town is very successful in the management of the system and the retirement of those bonds. So we're looking forward to the partnership with the town of Florence on this should the voters decide to go forward with this transaction, and we look forward to working with the town council going forward. And I am available for any questions. I believe Mr. Johnson probably is as well.
Any member of the council have a question, Dan? I got a couple. You know I'm going to.
Absolutely, Mayor.
In both yours and Mr. Jackson's report, I noticed a big difference between water and sewer connections. Why is that?
I don't believe they were in total connections.
Yeah, on your presentation, it says water connections average growth per year, 873, sewer connections, 1539. Now, do you have two lines running out of the house?
Not that I'm aware of, Mayor.
Well,
you can ask Mr. Jackson exactly on as far as where he got his figures from, but we were trying to show historically what happened, and Mr. Jackson was doing a projection going forward.
Okay, well, you know, Mr. Jackson, he's got 1,300 and 1,000. What is the difference? I don't understand. Dan?
If I understand it correctly, I think that there are certain service areas in the JU area where JU provides the sewer and the town provides the water, or another entity provides the water. So that's why there are slightly more sewer connections than there are water. That's my recollection.
Charles, you've been wanting to say something. Go ahead.
Part of the question I think you had there, Mayor, was that initially when we started getting involved, all the independent consultants started working on this project at some point in October. So a number of their items within these reports were projections. What Mr. Hodges has done is he has given you final connection numbers at the end of 2013, which we did not have. So some of ours were projections, and that's why there's a slight difference in some of those connection numbers.
Okay. Another question, Dan. When we talk about the ADQ permitted capacity on wastewater on your 4 plants.
Okay.
Did I understand you? Are we going to have to go back to CAG to get authorization to expand that, or have you already got that permission to do it? Or
On the plants?
yeah, on the sewer.
No, as far as, Mayor, let me go back to the original one. On the map here, and my apologies for not mentioning it, and I'm not sure. Mayor, the yellow line on the outside is actually our CAG area, which completely encompasses the entire Johnson Utility Service Territory, and it is planned, all those plants are beyond that 15 million gallons I showed. They're actually projected at build-out already with CAG. So no, there's not a requirement for the town to go back to CAG.
So we're not going to have to go back for 409 or whatever that number, whatever.
The 208?
What?
The 208.
Yeah, close.
Very close.
Yeah. We're not going to have to go back and get that. I mean, that's already done.
That's already done and taken care of, including basically the APP permits with Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
And that can be a long process sometimes by getting that through.
Yes, it can take to.
When you did the rate comparison, Dan, and you did the town of Florence wastewater, you did not include Anthem in that. You included Anthems in your utility users. Right? Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. In the area that we would be purchasing, in your economist.com report that you have listed there, Dan, you said high users are charged more?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you have high users out in that area, or what do you consider a high user?
Basically, as far as what, and I'm going to, from the Corporation Commission standpoint, they take an average user, and anyone who's using above average numbers when they're setting rates. So what we have is a tiered system. So once you hit over 10,000 gallons, the price goes up. I believe the town does as well, but we have more tiers than the town does.
Okay. I think that's all I've got. Anybody else got anything for Dan? Charles, do we want to go into the agreements, or is that it for the public presentation?
That's actually, we're completed on the presentations from both Mr. Jackson and Mr. Hodges from Johnson Utilities. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Minato, the town attorney, to kind of give you some bullet points about the management agreement and purchase agreements that are before you. And I will say that those are completely in draft form, so it's still kind of a work in progress, but I will turn it over to you.
You need to take a break, anybody? Take a break? Okay, go ahead. Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Vice Mayor and members of the council. It's my pleasure to address you tonight regarding this important undertaking. I think a couple of introductions are in order. I'd like you to know who's here because we assembled a fairly large group of people that have been involved in working on this transaction for the purpose mainly of ensuring that we would have the expertise here to ensure that any question you may have arising from Mr. Jackson's presentation or that of Mr. Hodges could be fully answered for you and for the benefit of the public tonight. I'll start with Mr. Johnson's team and also the Phoenix IDA. We have Mr. Juan Salgado, who's the director of the Phoenix IDA. Mr. Patrick Ray is from the law firm of Kutak Rock, and he is providing bond counsel to Mr. Johnson and Johnson Utilities. Of course, you've already seen and heard from Mr. Johnson tonight. We've all known him for a long time. Sitting over to my right, we have Mr. Gary Drummond from the law firm of Sahlquist and Drummond. Mr. Drummond is Mr. Johnson's chief legal counsel. And Mr. Gary Hayes, sitting next to him, is assisting with things that are ongoing at the Corporation Commission, I believe. And of course, you've already met and spoken to Mr. Dan Hodges. For the town, we have Mr. Fred Faith. He's from the law firm of Mariscal Weeks, or Dickinson Wright Mariscal Weeks, and he is a certified specialist in real estate who's been assisting me in an analysis of this transaction and will continue to do so as we begin to look at the real estate that will be conveyed by Johnson Utilities. We've got Mr. Michael Cafizzo, the town's longtime bond counsel from the firm of Greenberg and Traurig, along with his associate attorney, Mr. Paul Gales, of the same firm. Of course, Mr. Dan Jackson, who has been presenting tonight and has also advised the town on various aspects of its utility rates in the past. And Mr. John Mata from the engineering firm of Waterworks Engineers, who has undertaken to assist the town in an analysis of the physical assets and engineering aspects of Johnson Utilities. And of course, Mr. Costa, as an operator of a water and wastewater provider known as the Town of Florence, has provided a significant amount of input into this transaction, as well as Mr. Mitchell. So those are the people we have here tonight. As I said, we brought them here to ensure that any question that might arise after you had an opportunity to look at the presentations of the two parties would be available to you. I think it's important to consider a few of the overview factors tonight. What we're really contemplating at this time is the transference of a very important responsibility from the private sector, that being Johnson Utilities, to the government sector, which is, of course, the Town of Florence. That transference, this transaction that we're talking about, and the cancellation or the extinguishment of the certificates of convenience and necessity that are currently enjoyed by Johnson Utilities will also have to be approved by the Arizona Corporation Commission in a separate or a parallel proceeding, which is, has just started by the filing by Johnson Utilities of its application for this transference of assets and extinguishment of their certificates. But once that happens, the utility system will be operated and regulated as a government enterprise by the Town of Florence. It will no longer be under the regulation of the Arizona Corporation Commission. The town, of course, will continue to be regulated by the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Water Resources, as it currently is with regards to its existing system. But there are important differences in the way the utility operates as a government enterprise and the way it operates as a private enterprise. The responsibility for rate setting for Johnson Utilities is vested and is supervised by the Corporation Commission. The town, as a government entity, can, under the requirements of state law, set its own rates. And as you know, Mr. Jackson has been involved in providing the studies that we have used in the past to determine how to set our utility rates for our citizens. All this is to say to you that much of the contract negotiations, at least from the town's standpoint, I think have to do with the process of arriving at an acceptable set of contracts that are going to facilitate the metamorphosis of what is currently known as the Johnson Utilities company and enterprise into a government enterprise that will have to be operated pursuant to the Florence Town Code and state law. And while at the same time providing for all the necessary assurances that are required to ensure that the utility bondholder, who will be Mr. Johnson, will receive the principal and interest on his bonds, and that those bonds will eventually be retired. And so I think it's important for everyone to understand, and I say this to the public at large, that this process of negotiation of these contracts is ongoing as we approach the authorizing election on May the 20th. I would say from my perspective that thus far it has been very much an arm's length negotiation between two teams of very highly skilled professional people of equal strength. And I think that's a very important consideration for the public to understand that both sides of this transaction are very highly and well represented towards the goal of ensuring that at the end of the process, the town and the public's interests will be adequately protected, as will the interests of Mr. Johnson. The public ought to understand, however, at this point, that these negotiations are not finished, and that they will be continuing, and we will be continuing to come back to the council over the next 2 months with further drafts of the contracts, as well as the bond financing documents and other things that pertain to the financial aspects of this transaction. And I would like to point out that, in fact, many of the terms that are contained in the contract drafts that you have before you tonight have not yet been commented upon by Mr. Johnson's team of professionals because of, I guess, the speed with which we're trying to go forward with this, with the election coming up rapidly and everybody working very hard and late into the night. I mean, I'll say to Mr. Faith's benefit, I received a set of comments from him that came late in the night on Monday night. So this is kind of how it's going right now. Everybody's working really hard on this to try to ensure that we can arrive at mutually acceptable agreements in a timely fashion so that we are not unduly delayed in closing out this transaction if we receive the authorization of the voters. So it's very important to remember that this is an ongoing process. Really, it's an evolutionary process by which the two sides to this deal basically negotiate from a position of equal strength and eventually come to understandings and compromises that will enable both to walk away from the deal feeling satisfied that they are happy with the terms of the agreement and that each will get the benefits of their bargains as we try to make this transaction happen. So I'll touch very lightly on the management agreement because, as I say, it still is under negotiation, and I very recently sent some comments to Mr. Hodges on behalf of Johnson Utilities. And as I said, it came very late in the day on Tuesday. It didn't allow them for enough time to respond back to me tonight for tonight's meeting. And so, you know, what's in these documents you really shouldn't look at them for tonight's purposes from the standpoint that these have received the consent and the approval of Johnson Utilities or the people that are working for Johnson. All we had tonight was to enable you to have something in front of you so you could at least see more or less what the current state is, understanding that, you know, probably later this week or next week I'll get some comments back from Mr. Johnson's people, and then we'll continue on in this process. There's a lot of detail in these documents, and it's probably not necessary to go into all that detail tonight, but I'll touch on it very lightly and maybe from a conceptual standpoint. The management agreement, I think, is necessary because due to the enormity of Mr. Johnson's utility system, it's really not possible for the town to achieve a state where it could actually take over the operations of the utility this summer after the election if we receive the voter approval. And so it's a necessary part of the agreement, and it serves a couple of different purposes. One is to ensure that we can make a seamless transition with the utility company continuing to function as it does without any disruption to the consumers or the customers. And also, from Mr. Johnson's standpoint, I think, to ensure that the utility functions in a way that he will be ensured that it will produce the revenue that's required to meet the projections of Mr. Jackson and Mr. Hodges, and to ensure that there will be no difficulty in servicing the debt service on the bonds while providing enough revenue so that there's leftover revenue for the town to continue to improve and operate the utility system. As I say, it's kind of a metamorphosis where we're taking a privately operated utility, which plays by a slightly different set of rules, let's say, than a governmental enterprise. And so, you know, one of the areas of negotiation, of course, has to do with how can we structure the management agreement in a way that allows the utility to begin the transition into a governmental enterprise that has to deal with a lot of areas of law that don't necessarily affect Johnson Utilities. I mean, we deal with aspects that are contained in the Arizona revised statutes. We have a different mechanism for setting rates. We have to facilitate and utilize public procurement so that the public has an understanding of where the money is being spent. We deal, in certain aspects, we deal with our employees in a different way. For example, we have to adhere, because we're a governmental entity, to the constitutional requirements that apply to employees of a governmental entity, which is not something that you see with a private company. So that's part of the negotiation, is working into that area of structuring the terms so that Mr. Johnson's people can continue to manage the utility, but begin to transfer it into a way that it will be operated more along the lines of the way Mr. Costa has to operate his his utility system with the town's employees. The management agreement, therefore, is for 5 years, and I think that what you see when you read it is that after year 2, or at least by year 2, Mr. Johnson's people and our people have to arrive at a transition agreement that's going to basically contain a lot more detail about how we're going to facilitate this transfer over from Johnson Utilities to the town. And as we go through the years 3, 4, and 5, the goal is that the town will become increasingly more responsible for the day-to-day operations of the utility system, whether it's through absorbing some of Mr. Johnson's employees into the town and making them into town employees, or otherwise. The management agreement does call for the payment of $500,000 a year for the continued management of the system by Mr. Johnson's firm. But I think it's probably money well spent, because one, it can be paid from the revenue of the utility system, as I think Mr. Jackson indicated, and 2, it will ensure that we operate the utility system in a way that causes very little, or hopefully no, change in the daily lives of the people that rely on the utility system for their needs. There's other issues that have to be looked at, such as whether it's more advantageous for the town to insure the assets of the utility system the way it insures all its other physical assets, or whether we utilize insurance that's procured and provided by the manager. So there's a lot more than that in the managing agreement, but like I say, it's very much in an evolutionary stage. Not everything that I've just said has been actually formally agreed to in the negotiations by Mr. Drummond and his folks. So I'm just kind of giving you some of the thought processes that we've been taking into the negotiations thus far. But I do want to reiterate that I think the process of negotiation between the town of Florence and Johnson Utilities is working as it should work. And as I said before, an arm's length transaction that is going to ensure that the interests of the town, as well as Mr. Johnson and Johnson Utilities, are protected.
Thank you. Any member of the council have any questions for Jim? All I can say is I'm glad we're not paying him by the word. That's what attorneys usually get paid by, right, Gary? Kara, did you have a question?
It was actually a number, if you have it off the top of your head or easily accessible. What is the revenue expected, once again, per year?
Net revenue or gross revenue?
Net.
Net. Mr. Jackson, would you like to give that figure out?
He's getting his heavy computer out.
And the only reason why I'm asking, because if we're looking at the $500,000 a year management contract at the 53,885 connections, it's $9.28 per connection to go towards the management fees. So I just want to make sure we can account for it within.
There's a couple of different ways to skin this cat. And I'll harken back to when we discussed the transaction with Mr. Johnson in 2007. And at that time, I think, and I'll defer to Mr. Jackson because he was helping us with it at that time, we came up with a different way to skin the cat back in 2007, which was that we assigned a dollar value to each water connection and each sewer connection. And when you multiplied that by the number of connections, that was going to be the fee for the management of the utility. As I recall, I believe it worked out to something on the order of $23, maybe $24 for both, so that if you had a customer that had water and sewer, which I think the bulk of them do in the residential areas, then the management fee applicable to that customer, let's say, due to him having water and sewer, was about $24. So, you know, you can do it that way. You can look at it on a per connection basis. Mr. Johnson's proposal was simply to have a flat fee of $500,000 on this deal, but you know, I think you could probably work it either way, but I'll defer to Mr. Johnson. That's currently what we've been operating under.
Okay.
George, Mr. Johnson, can I get you to come over here? We're doing everything on, so it's going out to the public live. Thank you.
Councilwoman Walters, that 500,000 is $9 and something per connection, but that's per year. So remember, there's 12 months to the year.
See, I forgot a step in the equation. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's only, what, 75, 80 cents? And that's to handle all the operations and do everything.
I appreciate that. Thank you
All right,
for that
thank you. Thank you.
clarification.
And that's all.
Does any other council member have any questions? I've been asked to take a recess, so we're going to go for 5 minutes. We'll be back in 5 minutes, and at that time, I will open up to the public if they have any questions they'd like to ask under the new business, okay? I'll call the meeting to order.
That's all.
At this time, we'll take public comment or any questions. If you'd come up to the podium, write your name on the pad for our town clerk, and if there's any public comment or questions of us.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Damon Anderson, General Manager, Holiday Inn Express, and homeowner in Johnson Ranch. The question I have, and forgive me because I am relatively new, and a lot of this is, I'm familiar with two problems that have existed in Johnson Ranch from an infrastructure. The question I have is there, what kind of plans do we have in place for the infrastructure of some of the problems that they've had with Johnson Utilities, and is the town of Florence prepared to handle those problems and improving some of those issues? And again, I apologize, I don't know to what end this is and to what degree these have already been corrected, but I am curious, and that would be one concern I would have.
Well, the one thing Charles will be to answer that a little bit. I can tell you that there's already a plan for capital improvement projects as we go along, but Charles, you want to go ahead and answer that?
Throughout this process, when we started looking at the evaluation process, and I might defer to Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Casa here in a moment, but throughout this process, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Hodges, and their operations people have already begun to do some of the capital projects that we were informed of in the beginning, so those are in the process. However, throughout this entire evaluation period, I know they've also identified some things that will need to change where there's growth, and the growth occurs. Things are going to have to change a little bit as far as capacity and stuff like that. So I'll defer to Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that's a part of this transition period. There are things that are intimate and known to Johnson Utilities that once the town acquires, with our interface with their technical and their field folks, we identify those and come up with a plan to repair. I too have heard of some things, lift stations and whatnot, that alarm quite a bit. Those sorts of things will be identified and fixed with the assistance of Johnson Utilities.
And we will address that as the same way as we address any issue here in town as far as setting out a capital improvement program and so forth as that, but also be in the position to take care of a problem if it does come up.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Any others?
As a James Curley, I live at 31459 North Claridge Circle, Santan Valley, Johnson Ranch. I'm a retired individual. I've been retired for many, many years. I've lived in Johnson Ranch for 10 years. The thing that sticks me in the mind the most and upsets me some is your annual increase in costs. Now, this gentleman here said that it roughly would be around 5% a year. I figured that out to be about $108 a year. Would that be correct? From that 2162?
I need you to speak into the mic so it's going out.
Okay, is that 5% of the 2162 that you presented to us per year increase?
No, the 2162 is not related to the increases in annual cost. The 2162 is the amount you pay per connection.
Okay.
That's not the operating cost of the system.
Okay.
That's just the capital cost of
Okay.
acquiring it.
Okay. And then the one other fact that you emphasized was about a 3% cost of living increase per year, and averages out probably a lot more than 3%. And as a senior citizen, I've been receiving about 1.5%. And of course, my wife and I, retirement money is very, very valuable to us. So I'm skeptical, but I hope all these numbers and words can be understood by everybody. So
Well, we do too.
that they are correct.
Each one of us up here have to live on a budget, just the same as you do. But we also keep in mind that we know that there is going to be an increase. There's no way that anybody can get away from it.
I understand that.
We try to keep it as low as we can, and Dan's been around with me long enough to know that I fight to try to keep it as low as we can. And I don't think there's a council member up here that wants to increase it any more than we have to. But we have no control over some of the things, so, I mean, I can't control electricity costs. We can't, and if the deeper we have to go to pump water, the more electricity it takes, which is a cost factor that's horrible. The price of oil to make electricity in some of these situations, that's up there too. So, you know, we don't want to make money, a lot of money. We want to keep the cost down, make the project work good.
Yes, Mayor, and I just want to clarify one thing about the comment I made earlier, and that is that...
You're going to speak into the mic too.
Yes. The town will not have to raise the rates in the Johnson service area in order to acquire the system.
Right.
That will not have to happen. The point I'm trying to make is that it is inevitable that at some point in the future, after you acquire the system, you're going to have to raise rates.
Right.
The reason is that the cost of everything goes up by 3% a year just due to inflation. Commodities go up in price. I mean, think about 10, 15 years ago. The cost of milk, eggs, gallon of gasoline, all of that is more today than it was 15 to 20 years ago. So it's reasonable to expect that 15 to 20 years from now, costs are going to be higher. Now, there are great opportunities and there's great potential for the town acquiring this system, but there's also great responsibility. And one of the responsibilities is to make the difficult decisions to occasionally adjust that rate structure to ensure that the revenues meet expenses. And so I think it's unrealistic to expect that you'll never have to do a rate adjustment. You will. I personally think that the rate adjustments will be very modest when you look at what other rate increases are around the state.
I think it's also important to note that the rates will increase regardless of who the owner is of the utility, whether it's Johnson Utilities or the town of Florence, because that cost for operations is there, whether it's the ownership of Johnson or the ownership of the town of Florence.
That's right. Costs go up, and utilities, like any other business, have no choice but to pass those increased costs through to their ultimate user.
Can you explain again about the 5% reduction for franchise fee?
Go ahead. Sure. As I understand it, all Johnson users pay a 5% franchise tax to the town of Florence. That would be eliminated under, once the town acquires the system, because town isn't going to pay a franchise tax to itself.
That's...
For the citizens in the town.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Daniel clarified that. All Johnson customers who are within the town limits of Florence.
Today.
That's correct.
And it's because there's a franchise fees, because Mr. Johnson, one of the utilities, and all utilities pay the franchise fees to us. Isn't that correct?
And please remember, council members and audience, the cost of living factor will also increase by 3% on all aspirins that you may have to take with all the words and numbers. Thank you much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, at this time, I'm going to close the public comment section of the new business under A. Go ahead.
Item 7, new business. A, discussion, approval, disapproval of authorizing the town manager to finalize all agreements with Johnson Utilities LLC and Southwest Environmental Utilities LLC and bring back to council for action at a later date.
The public needs to know this is not authorizing the town to buy Johnson Utilities. This is all we're doing is authorizing our town manager to continue working upon the needed agreements if the voters do pass it and we decide to buy it. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And the current information is still in draft form, and we're constantly working on that.
Absolutely, and we probably will get closer as the weeks coming up, and we'll bring something to council here in the near future.
Will we have another workshop before with the finalized agreement, or?
My anticipation is we should sit down again once those agreements are more finalized. As Mr. Minato said, there's also the bond indenture that they'll be working on at some point here in the near future. So all these documents will be coming to council. We should probably have a work session to cover those documents.
But right now, we're looking to give you authorization.
Correct.
What you're asking for is authorization to continue on.
Yes, sir.
Can we also send out some kind of public notice when we're ready to do that? Even if we put notices in utility bills or newspaper ads, so that more people can be here to put in, have their input?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Woolridge, my anticipation is also the PowerPoint and documentations provided here tonight. I did talk to Mr. Knutson, the Assistant City Manager and a PIO for the town. We will be creating a separate link on the front page of the town's website for people that were not here that can access these documents. I want to make sure they're available to the public.
Mayor, I so move as presented on the agenda.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Item B, discussion, approval, disapproval of authorizing the filing of a motion to intervene on behalf of the town of Florence on the docket of the Arizona Corporation Commission docket number WS-02987A-13-0477 with regard to Johnson Utilities LLC application for approval of sale and transfer of assets and conditional cancellation of certificate of convenience and necessity.
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Second call to the public, same as I said at the first call to the public. Does any member of the public have anything they'd wish to discuss with the council? Seeing no movement, I close the public call to the council. Tommy? Ruben? Tom? Sarah? Bill?
I have nothing.
Valerie? The only thing I can say, Council, I appreciate your consideration on what we did tonight. I think we are setting the future of Florence on the right track. I think that we've got a long way to go on getting this done, but I think that the future of Florence was solidified tonight. Need a motion?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We are adjourned.